Good morning and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining. I'm David Walmsley. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and it brings me great pleasure to be in this partnership with the Royal Society of Canada and also Universities Canada for this very special session, looking at the importance of our institutions with three of the senior leaders of the university sector in Canada. The purpose of the next hour is to ensure that we have an exchange of ideas around the solutions and the challenges that, of course, are top of mind for all of us during this extraordinary pandemic period. But it's also an opportunity for you, the audience who are joining us, to participate as well with questions in the chat side of Zoom. It's an amazing thing we're using sentences like that I never imagined we would be discussing, but it is a pleasure, despite the virtual nature of this, to bring together our three panelists today. Firstly, from the University of Lethbridge, Mike Mann, President and Vice Chancellor. Sophie Damour, who is the Rector of the Université Laval, and Merrick Gertler, the President of the University of Toronto. As I said at the top, this is a partnership between both the Royal Society of Canada and Universities Canada. And it's important, I think, to note that Mike is the immediate past chair, Sophie is the current chair of Universities Canada, and Merrick is the incoming chair of Universities Canada. And so we're well represented, both geographically and in terms of the different institutions across the country. So I'm going to begin by asking Sophie, if I may, and we're delighted to be able to offer both languages in this discussion. A question about what are the challenges that you have seen up to this point? And after Sophie has spoken, I'm going to go to Mike and Merrick with the same question, an opening statement really, as it were. What are the challenges that you have experienced to date? Sophie.
Okay, so to the audience and to you, David, and my colleagues, pleasure to be here. And I'll do my remarks in French. So when you're going to see me talking, I will go in French, but I wanted to inform you can use the translation services that is provided. Alors, merci David. C'est une aventure incroyable qu'on a vécue dans les universités depuis le mois de mars. Au Québec, cette arrivée de la COVID a eu des impacts très subis, très rapides, et puis on a dû basculer rapidement en ligne. Alors, depuis ce temps, c'était le 12 ou le 13 mars, là, si ma mémoire est bonne, où on a dû basculer, fermer les universités, fermer nos accès et puis trouver les nouvelles façons de faire pour continuer notre mission. Au Canada, c'est 1,4 million d'étudiants et étudiantes qui se sont retrouvés à devoir apprendre et continuer leur projet d'études autrement. C'était un petit miracle ou un grand miracle. À l'échelle du pays, certainement un effort colossal. Il faut reconnaître le travail des professeurs, notamment, qui se sont investis de façon exceptionnelle pour transférer cette formation à distance. Il y a eu les défis de la recherche, de la continuité de la recherche en une période qui était tellement importante pour l'humanité et pour laquelle on avait besoin, on a toujours besoin tellement de la connaissance, de la recherche, de la vérité, de ce transfert d'informations vers les grands publics. Nos chercheurs devaient en même temps continuer de faire la recherche et trouver les réponses face à comment réagir et se défendre devant ce grand virus-là. Alors, toutes les facettes de nos vies ont été affectées. Puis dans les universités, ça a été le télétravail, ça a été le financement, ça a été la formation à distance. Donc, plusieurs effets qui, on en discutera plus longuement, mais n'auront pas qu'apporter du négatif dans les universités, aura certainement ouvert des portes puis présenté des opportunités.
Thank you, Sophie. Mike, what has the experience been for you in that period that Sophie references, between that period where everything, the first week of March, there was an awareness, there was a pandemic perhaps, that it that there's something would hit home, and the facts that ultimately you had to shut down the campus. Tell us your experience.
Yes, well, first of all, good afternoon, or as we are in Alberta, good morning, everyone. It's great to see some friends, at least their names on the screen, so it's nice to have a group that has gathered together. David, as Sophie said, obviously the initial response had to be very rapid. And I've often joked that we responded with a duct tape approach to having to manage through in 4 days, moving from primarily face-to-face to almost exclusively online. And I think it is important to note that in those early days, we truly were locked down. And so one of the challenges for our researchers, for example, was as we moved to this very dramatic lockdown, how do you deal with everything from animal care to just some experiments that were, say, midstream? And so the response by our faculty, graduate students, postdocs, et cetera, to that was remarkable, I would say. And I'm pleased to say that for the most part, it was handled very well, so that we didn't have any significant challenges. But of course, the stress associated with that in the early days for our faculty, for our students, for families of all of those folks that were impacted was quite significant. And that's certainly a theme that I would say that has carried through the theme of mental health that is of great concern to all of us. And I'm assuming maybe we'll talk about that throughout, so I won't spend a bunch of time on that. But I will say that if there's been a consistent challenge, it's certainly not just been in relation to how we responded as related to delivery of our academic programming and our research, but how all that happened within the context of the humanness of COVID, which of course has been very significant. The other thing I'll say just off the top, and again, I won't go into detail, but we know that the impact has been differential. We've heard about the differential impact as it relates to different communities, and certainly one of the ones that we have really worked hard to support, but have been challenged by, is our Indigenous community that surrounds us here in Southern Alberta. The challenge of communities being locked down and not having the access to the internet in the way that folks in the city do. And so the differential nature of the impact, I think, is another theme that really emerged quite quickly as we dealt with the response to COVID. So I'll stop there as just some initial thoughts.
Thanks, Mike. And Merrick, building on that, obviously the University of Toronto has an incredible number of students, this talk of community. What has the experience been for your institution?
Well, very similar in many ways to what Sophie and Mike have described. You know, on one level, it's been a time when the community has pulled together for an all hands on deck effort, which has been truly impressive. You know, our faculty have moved mountains. We pivoted 6,300 courses from in-class to online in the course of a weekend, which is an astounding logistical undertaking. I don't think anyone thought we could do it, including ourselves. But you know, that just gives you a sense of how the community pulled together, and you know, it took so much effort on the part of so many people, not just faculty, but librarians and staff, the technical team, and so on. And of course, a huge adjustment by students who've been put through an awful lot. But at the same time, you know, that community has been very fragmented and fractured as we have now been forced to kind of interact primarily through virtual means, with a few notable exceptions. And on the one hand, it has gone remarkably well, considering what might have happened. And we're very proud of that. On the other, we're acutely aware that the longer this goes on, the more that sort of social capital that holds those communities together begins to degrade. It begins to sort of decline. And I think the quality of interaction, the level of trust, the quality of communication is likely to suffer. So it's something that I think people in our positions really worry about, because universities are nothing if they're not the people that comprise them. And so we are doing everything we can to try and retain that sense of community.
Yeah, staying with you, Merrick. I mean, the challenge is, I'm sure, in many ways the obvious, but it's also the hidden, the sense of the students that you cannot really put your arms around, that sense of what pressures are they feeling, be they financial, be they logistical in terms of travel, the differentiating challenges that Mike speaks of in terms of access to technology and the like. Your pastoral care is a key element to university life. What have you been able to achieve in the last 8 months?
That's a lovely phrase, pastoral care. I think that captures it really nicely. Well, so there's, it's been a mixed experience. On the upside, we've seen tremendous innovation in the ability of our student life professionals to deliver as many services as possible online. So for example, when international students returned to our campus in September, many of them arrived a little bit early to go through 14 days of quarantine, and we put them up in hotels. We had arranged ground transportation to get them from the airport directly to their quarantine site with testing and daily interaction with them through remote means, from student life teams, from our wellness and health people, offering up fitness classes and other services in order to keep them healthy and well, but also just to check in with them. So, there's been tremendous innovation in leveraging the digital tools as much as possible. That's the good news. And I think that story about the quarantining students is generalizable to the rest of our population as well. The less good news is that we know that social isolation is a problem, and it's exacerbating challenges around mental health, as Mike noted, and this sense of loss of community. It's also, the case that some of our students actually don't have access to the basic tools that online functioning is demanding: high-speed internet access, a decent computer, a private place at home to work, where they're not bothered or distracted. Things that many of us take for granted. In our very diverse student population at U of T, and I'm sure the same is true at Lethbridge and Laval, we know there's a huge range of experiences there, and we're acutely conscious of that. As Mike noted, we think that the pandemic has amplified, magnified, exacerbated a lot of these divisions, and so we're doing our best to manage those, but we're mindful of how they weigh on our student population.
I think that's something that's common for everyone involved in the panel. But Sophie, what has the experience been at Laval, where you obviously are deeply connected with business as well as university life in that intersection, allowing third parties to work with the students on campus and off campus and continue those relationships? How has Laval been able to respond to that? And what are your concerns with respect to the natural challenges that have been put before us all?
For sure, all of I would say the component of partnership within universities have been impacted by the pandemic. If some employers used to take internship to large numbers, some of them were not capable of welcoming and working with the students or providing a test case or example or problem for problem solving initiative and approaches. So, and we're less interested also in support entrepreneurship project that was requesting extra time of them to be there and mentoring. So all of the student experience that comes, that is supported within our university and within all of the universities in Canada in different ways, they were impacted by the COVID, because the first, focus, and I think we're all happy that that was the case to some extent, was health and security at work, in the university, for the people at home in the community. The challenge has been to keep this alive. And so we've used different strategy, and of course the leadership of our technological teams. Hey, là, je parle en anglais. You got me. I wanted to do this in French. Sorry. Je me suis fait attraper. I will switch to French. Toute cette connexion, là, ça a été un défi, puis ça continue de l'être, mais avec la technopédagogie, avec les efforts que l'on fait pour utiliser au mieux l'environnement que l'on a actuellement, puis avec une équipe qui est sur le terrain pour faire en sorte que les étudiants puissent travailler en stage, des fois à distance pour les entreprises. Ça a été important, il faut continuer de le faire. Notre défi, je vous dirais, évidemment, je partage celui de la santé mentale, puis Méric l'a très, très bien expliqué. Il y a quand même le défi des étudiants internationaux parce qu'ils sont une partie importante de nos universités et ils contribuent à l'expérience étudiante. Quand ils sont chez nous avec nos étudiants canadiens, québécois, il y a une dynamique, il y a un apprentissage du monde à travers ces échanges. Puis là, bien sûr, ils nous manquent. Et on a hâte qu'ils reviennent et on a hâte de pouvoir permettre à nos étudiants de faire les voyages d'études à l'international aussi. Donc ça, c'est des défis qui sont bien réels. Je pense aussi que, je dirais, ce qu'il ne faut jamais perdre de vue, c'est la résilience et la détermination de nos étudiants et nos étudiantes. Puis il faut le remarquer, dans un moment difficile, ils persévèrent. Puis nous, avec nos technologies, puis notre plateforme, on a un outil d'intelligence artificielle qui mesure la réussite en cours de session. Et on s'intéresse beaucoup, cette session-ci, à comparer l'avancement puis la réussite aux sessions antérieures. Puis nos indicateurs nous disent qu'on est au bon endroit, que c'est comparable. C'est-à-dire, c'est pas parfait. Je dirais pas que la vie universitaire est parfaite, mais le cœur mission est protégé, puis les étudiants continuent leur projet, puis continuent d'avancer dans leurs études avec un taux de réussite qui est comparable. Donc, il faut se réjouir de ça, puis il faut travailler sur l'élément de la santé mentale.
I'm going to stay with you just for a second, Sophie, with respect to the question of international students. How many, just for the audience, how many international students would you normally have, and how many physically have been able to come to Laval for this academic year?
We have 7,000 students at Laval, and if my counts are correct, something like half of it were either here or were able to come. And so there is still a good part of the international students which are still abroad and studying from distance. So this is I don't have the exact number, sure. I will give you that. But you know, across the country is 200,000 students normally that are international students coming to Canada for their studies. So it's an important part of our over the 1.4 million students.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the all-important question of funding and per capita funding, which is a sticky one. But Mike, before we leave the discussion around campus life, you mentioned at the top about the Aboriginal experience. For many of the Indigenous students, they do not have the same access, and they are not enjoying the same level of education that they had when the campus was available to them. Can you explain a little bit about the rural setting and you mentioned having to take care of the animals and such like? What is the situation currently with respect to the student life in Lethbridge?
Thanks, and a great question. And, you know, I can answer that obviously on multiple levels, but first of all, I'll say that Given that University of Lethbridge has the majority of our students that come from away, only about 30% of our students are from the Lethbridge area. It's meant that our students are spread around Canada and further, and so our ability to support them in community has been challenged. And so we have therefore had to go to a great deal of virtual connectivity that all of us have, but certainly on the mental health front, it has presented some challenges. The related challenge, interestingly, has been for the city of Lethbridge. Because we're the largest employer in Lethbridge, and our population on campus represents about 10% of the city of 100,000. The city has been very negatively impacted by the lack of students coming to Lethbridge. And so there's been great concern expressed by the business community, obviously in the city. The impact on local grocery stores, on you name it, has been very dramatic because of the lack of students in the city. The city transforms like many cities like ours that are university cities in September. We didn't have that transformation, and that's been very challenging for the economy of the city. The third thing I'll say is, related to our Indigenous students, we have seen some great challenges on that front, and so much of it relates to connectivity. And this is a challenge across the country, right? For rural communities, Indigenous communities. We were pleased actually with the announcement of the Liberal government regarding trying to increase connectivity across the country. And we hope that comes to fruition, because at the present time, we've got students writing term papers on their iPhones because that's the only way that they can connect back to the university. We've got other students that literally have to drive an hour and a half from rural community to our campus so that they can use a computer so that they can continue with their studies. So there are differential impacts, but overall, I would say, one of the things we think this has brought to light is how critical it is for Canada to recognize the differential benefits that exist in less urban settings as it relates to connectivity. And so I hope actually that in some sense, COVID turns out to be a positive signal as it relates to the critical nature of addressing this issue.
Yeah, I think, Mike, just staying with you on that, one of the challenges, all three of you represent destination universities. You're in a very competitive marketplace. There are a lot of choices to be made. A lot of different ages and stages are put into the mixing bowl before a final decision gets made. But, how the universities respond and the ability to say, we're there, we're listening to you, we're feeling your challenges, is probably a key test in terms of how you as an institution are able to move forward. Whether you were there for that second year undergrad or whether that postgrad was able to do the research that had been long promised, it's coming down on the weight of the administrators and faculty staff. What do you think, apart from, you mentioned a quick positive that could come from this, but take me into your thinking around where Lethbridge and indeed universities generally are going to have to move.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, we spent about an hour and a half on this very topic, so it's timely at our president's executive meeting yesterday. And I would say I would use one word to express the discussion we had, and that word is hope. So one of the things that our students and our faculty and staff are struggling with, as are all Canadians and people around the world, is a question of what the future is going to look like for them and how we help them interpret what the sense of the future will be. And so our thinking right now is going into how do we help instill a greater sense of hope amongst our community, both those who are presently our students, our faculty, our staff, but also, of course, prospective students. I mean, the students that graduated from high school this year have had such a significant challenge thinking about the transition to university or college and what that looks like. And so trying to help those students understand that this is a short-term experience, that we intend to ensure that as they move through their studies in their first year, but moving forward, that we will bring back the experiences that they really are pining for, let's just say. And so our efforts going forward are really going to be about how do we communicate in different ways a sense of hope looking forward. And so, the question of what does fall 2021 look like is what we're spending a lot of time on right now. How can we express to those various communities a sense of optimism for fall 2021, where we've all pretty much said what's going to happen in winter 2021. And so I think looking forward, it's about how do we present the optimism that we want to have for fall 2021, when of course, as with so much of what we've all been facing, there is uncertainty. I mean, I'm in a province where we now have the single largest number of individuals with COVID in Canada, not just accounting for population. And so trying to instill a sense of hope within a context of that is not easy, but that's what we will be spending a lot of time on over the next number of months.
Thanks, Mike. To Sophie, one of the points you made earlier was that you're working with artificial intelligence, you're using technology to try and help those students who are working remotely and studying remotely. But for the children in grade 12 or looking at considering university at whatever stage they're at, presumably there is a conversation going on between the student and the parents as to whether it's worth it. What do you say to that challenge?
Oui, je pense que cette conversation-là, on l'imagine dans notre tête pour les universités, pour les services, les entreprises en général. Comment allons-nous nous transformer? Est-ce que ce qu'on a vécu va devenir permanent? Est-ce que c'est la bonne façon d'être l'université? Et je crois que ce qui est le plus évident actuellement, c'est que ce qui nous manque, c'est vraiment l'expérience humaine. C'est l'expérience des échanges du campus. C'est cette activité que l'on mène en présence et qui va chercher tout le talent humain. Donc, on a et on doit réfléchir à la nouvelle université, cette université où on reconnaît qu'il faut développer des compétences du futur, qu'il faut résoudre des problèmes complexes, qu'il faut avoir l'ouverture à l'interdisciplinarité et pour ça qu'il faut être dans les échanges, dans l'appréciation de la complexité de notre monde, puis de construire ça ensemble. Et ça, ça demande à ce qu'on se pose la question, qu'est-ce que le numérique peut apporter? Et comment on peut la construire sans exclure le levier du numérique, mais en transformant nos salles de classe. Donc, on a des exemples, puis je vais prendre juste rapidement, mais des exemples où on inverse complètement la pédagogie. Alors, si dans le passé, moi, quand j'ai étudié, j'apprenais en classe, puis je faisais mes travaux d'équipe hors classe. Bien, dans le futur, il y a des grandes chances que j'apprenne à l'extérieur de la classe, puis que je fasse mes travaux dans la classe. Et ça, ça s'en vient et puis ça va énormément enrichir la qualité de notre formation, notre capacité d'aider les prochaines générations à faire face aux défis auxquels ils doivent faire face. Et quand Mike parle d'espoir, de perspectives positives, je pense que l'engagement des universités à réfléchir positivement au futur, là, sans négliger notre responsabilité actuelle, bien entendu, mais vraiment, ça fait du bien. Ça fait du bien et on constate sur le terrain, moi, c'est les professeurs qui viennent me voir, c'est les doyens, c'est les doyennes qui me disent on est prêt pour cette discussion-là parce qu'on a, en quelques mois, expérimenté tellement de possibilités du numérique qu'on est prêt à prendre des décisions sur l'usage. Et ça, je pense que ça va être très, très positif pour l'avenir. Mais penser que la valeur des universités ne réside que dans le transfert des connaissances, c'est une erreur. L'université, c'est beaucoup plus que ça. C'est très riche, c'est beaucoup plus complet. Et on va bien sûr voir des offres différentes. Puis bien sûr, il y aura des universités, elles existent déjà, les universités complètement numériques. Puis elles rejoignent des clientèles particulières. Il ne faut pas les oublier. Il y a des parents monoparentales. Il y a des gens qui ne vivent pas dans une ville où il y a une université. Il y a des gens qui travaillent. Quand je regarde le profil d'âge à l'Université Laval, on a une croissance significative chez les 30 ans et plus. Les 30 ans et plus, ils sont déjà venus à l'université, ils reviennent, ils font des formations plus courtes, des maîtrises, ils s'intéressent, ils ont une vie professionnelle, familiale. Ça fait leur affaire de pouvoir étudier à distance. Donc, ça va prendre une proposition beaucoup plus diversifiée. Et ça va faire de nos universités des universités beaucoup plus inclusives, à mon avis. Alors, il faut avoir un regard critique des technologies parce qu'on est tanné d'être en Zoom. Hein? On veut vivre d'autres choses, mais en même temps, je dirais constructive, réaliste, puis ne pas négliger les leviers qu'on a devant nous. Ils sont importants.
Yeah, just to stay with that, Sophie, for one follow-up, the interesting challenge, I think you presented actually in quite revolutionary terms, that there can be a complete shift and an institution becomes even more accessible through the digital side of learning. If we go back just one generation in Canada, university was not the norm. Through a change in funding models, in recruitment, and in adjusting the various offerings, there are more people than ever before, of course, being educated to a higher standard. Do you think, though, that the pipeline, with the assumption that when you get into a university, it is to do better in employment terms, that when you look at the economic changes that are happening to a lot of companies, just take retail as one example, is it possible that people will decide to just miss completely that education pipe and go out into the entrepreneurial side of things, foregoing an official education like their parents and grandparents before?
I think more than ever, you know what students are telling me today. They think of their education not just as one degree. They think of it as the accumulation of expertise, and they want to have something unique, and they're looking for a mix. So often I will meet students who are telling me, I want to do a bachelor degree in this discipline, and I want a master in another one. And I think that will make me unique and will permit me to bring something new to the society, something stimulating. So I'm not saying that people cannot be peuvent pas apprendre eux-mêmes. J'ai de la misère, hein? Je veux le faire en français, j'ai vraiment de la misère. Mais je pense qu'il y a des gens qui sont autodidactes. Je pense qu'il y a des gens qui sont extrêmement brillants puis qui ont cette capacité-là. Mais je ne crois pas, au contraire, nos données ne nous disent pas que les gens nous disent aujourd'hui, on a fait les sondages, à 95%, la population canadienne disent que nous avons un rôle extrêmement important à jouer pour le développement des générations à venir, puis pour aider cette génération aussi à remonter l'échelle sociale, à profiter de l'éducation pour faire du progrès dans cette échelle sociale-là. Donc, tous les sondages, les indications, les étudiants dans nos universités ne nous disent pas que la formation universitaire va perdre tu sais, de son importance dans le futur, au contraire. Mais on doit, nous, continuellement être pertinents. Et la recherche de la pertinence, c'est au cœur même de l'existence des universités. Ça fait 1000 ans qu'on fait ça, hein, qu'on évolue puis qu'on se pose toujours la question de la pertinence. Puis on va devoir le faire dans un environnement puis un monde qui change.
Thank you. Merrick, building on that, this question of what is the residential university of the future, the University of Toronto is an enormous real estate holder, as are other institutions such as Ryerson University in the center of Toronto. When you look at the general phenomenon, I believe, is that when the economy is performing badly, people shelter in education. They stay on and study more with the belief, as long as those who have the financial capability to do so will do that second degree or do that the diploma. Where is the University of Toronto currently thinking its future is going to lie?
Well, you're right. We are deeply invested in real estate in three major parts of the Toronto region, obviously downtown Toronto, but also in Mississauga and Scarborough, with other farther flung outposts as well. But we have been committed as a city-based university and have benefited from that fortunate geography for many years. And I think in the longer term, we will continue to benefit from it. Your question, though, is really on point, the future of the residential university, because a lot of people are asking that question at a time when, high density living is under some stress and strain, at a time when people's willingness to ride on public transit systems to and from their campuses every day might be viewed as a challenging experience. And there's no question that the remote option, the remote alternative, the digital alternative, has been both attractive to many students and their parents, and also a godsend in terms of being able to allow us to continue offering our services. But I think one has to be careful not to read too much off from the sort of current condition that we're in. Once we have a vaccine widely available, and I don't know how soon that will be, there are some optimistic signals, but one shouldn't underestimate the logistical challenge of rolling out and distributing a vaccine more broadly. But once we get to that point, I think that people will clamor back to our campuses with great enthusiasm. And it comes down to the point that Sophie was making a few minutes ago, that what people are missing from the current arrangements is that social contact, that opportunity for serendipitous encounters, for informal interaction. Many forms of practical teaching and learning require in-person presence. The kind of co-curricular experience, all the things that happen around the classroom and outside the classroom, which are often best accommodated in urban environments. And also, I think the opportunity for students to work in the community and with the community. This has been one of the traditional advantages of universities situated in urban centers, that the world is on their doorstep, and we've all seen a tremendous swing towards experiential learning. So I think that those long-term advantages will prevail. And I do think that the residential university does have a future. At the same time, though, I do think that what we've been experiencing over the last 8 months has really opened us up to the possibilities of having a both-and model. We can have both a residential experience, but we can also reach new markets, new students we've never dreamed of reaching before, or never really reached as successfully as we now know we can through virtual interaction, whether they be in hard-to-reach neighborhoods of the Greater Toronto Area, or in Northern Canada, in Indigenous communities or other underserved communities, or halfway around the world. So, you know, I think that we're really excited by how we can really enhance the traditional model in ways that open up opportunities left, right, and center.
Yeah, it raises a really interesting question, and I think what all three of you are showing is the glimmers of optimism that can come from a desperate situation. Do you think, and this puts you all on the spot a little bit, we'll maybe begin, Mike, with you and take it where you'd like, but the question of funding, do you think the governments are able to keep up with the discoveries that you're all identifying in terms of the that and both model that that Merrick speaks to, so that they can adjust the funding, which crudely is based on research, is based on bums on seats, it's based on a number of a sliding scale? Do you think that formula is going to change?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and certainly I think we're you know, from a funding perspective, we're dealing with it on a couple of fronts. Of course, the short-term front as it relates to COVID and all that we've had to do to ensure that we can remain, you know, offering the programming that we do, but using different means. But the future question is I think a critical one, and I do think it's a conversation, I would describe it as, that needs to happen at both the provincial and federal level. Each of our provinces, of course, will address these things differently. I'm in the midst of some funding challenges in Alberta as it relates to pre-COVID considerations because of the economy. And then we, of course, have COVID and post-COVID. So I think, as both Merrick and Sophie have articulated, the evolution of our universities in terms of how we deliver programming, both in person and using other innovative means, is a discussion that we have to have with our provincial funders and our federal funders, so that they become partners in the evolution of our institutions. And I think, as Merrick said a minute ago, we see great opportunities coming out of COVID in terms of what we've learned in terms of the delivery, not only of academic programming, but how we've dealt with the challenges of working with graduate students, with research, and how to address the short-term challenges on that front, but also how we engage with communities. And you know, we've traditionally, of course, engaged with our communities in a face-to-face means. We've seen some great innovations in terms of how we're engaging with our communities more remotely, and I think that presents some real opportunities as we look forward, in terms of not just traditional education, but also looking at new forms of delivery. And so all of us have been looking at, you know, stackable programming, these sorts of things, so that we can be as truly as accessible as possible. But that will require a conversation with our government, so that they understand, as we evolve and we innovate, we may have to look at things in a very different way in terms of funding formulas. And so, is the traditional credit hour model going to be the model of the future, for example? Or are we going to look at different models in terms of how our programming is articulated? And then what does that mean in terms of the nature of funding models that provinces have for our institutions? So I would suggest that the opportunity is for the conversations with governments. It's been interesting to have conversations. I think in the early days, governments thought that we would actually save a bunch of money because COVID meant that we had less costs as it related to the delivery of what we're doing. Well, in fact, what we've been able to demonstrate, both more provincially as well as federally, through some of the information we've provided, is that our costs have increased quite substantially, because we're having to deliver things in new ways that requires new technologies, right? So I do think that the future is about a conversation between our governments and ourselves and some of our key partners, like the Royal Society, like Universities Canada, for us all to come together to say, okay, if we're going to innovate and continue to look at how we can evolve as we come out of COVID, how we work with our funding bodies, and I would go beyond that in terms of the world of philanthropy, in terms of foundations, etc., that can be partners with us as we look to evolve how we deliver in ways that can be really supportive of both local communities as well as at the federal level.
Thanks, Mike. Very, very helpful answer. Sophie, the same question. Do you feel that the politicians are listening and that they are responding in the way that you need for the funding model to keep up with the revolutionary changes you're experiencing?
C'est un défi, hein? La finance publique en temps de COVID, c'est un réel défi. Mais il faut, j'abonde dans le sens de Mike, il faut avoir cette discussion avec les gouvernements, puis il faut réfléchir à ce qui s'en vient. Si on veut une relance économique qui ne s'étire pas trop longtemps, on va devoir trouver des façons de générer plus de valeur. Hein, notre PIB, notre GDP, il va devoir augmenter. Puis pour le faire augmenter, il y a plusieurs façons. Là. On peut imaginer, si on veut le doubler, là, si on veut passer une croissance de 1,5 à 3 hein, ben, ça veut dire qu'il faudrait avoir doublé le nombre d'employés, toutes choses étant égales par ailleurs, juste si on voulait imaginer cette croissance-là. Donc, elle doit venir de la valeur ajoutée, elle doit venir de l'innovation, de notre capacité de valoriser la recherche, de travailler avec les entreprises, de travailler avec les différents milieux, les hôpitaux, les écoles, pour trouver des nouvelles façons de faire, puis trouver des nouvelles propositions d'affaires. Et ça veut dire plus de relations avec les milieux, plus de valorisation de la recherche, puis plus d'innovation. Puis rappelez-vous, puis il faut se rappeler ça, on a vécu des grandes crises, on a vécu la Grande Dépression, on a vécu des grandes guerres. Après chacune de ces grandes crises, il y a eu l'émergence de technologies de rupture. Et elles ont eu des effets significatifs sur la redistribution des pouvoirs économiques à l'échelle planétaire. Et le Canada ne peut pas rester en reste. Il ne peut pas juste dire, ben, je vais attendre que tout ça se décide. Alors, on a du leadership en intelligence artificielle, on a du leadership dans le domaine de la quantique, en médecine personnalisée, dans toutes sortes de secteurs. Puis, il faut le maintenir parce que la vraie, je dirais, la vraie course du point de vue de l'économie, parce qu'on parle d'économie là actuellement, elle va venir dans les prochains mois. Donc, une main-d'œuvre qui est mieux adaptée, qui est plus productive, mais surtout une économie qui a la capacité d'innover. Et ça, je pense qu'il faut avoir cette conversation-là parce que ça veut dire qu'il faut revoir la façon dont on articule nos collaborations dans le respect de nos missions respectives. Mais il faut trouver des façons pour être plus articulé. Mais je pense qu'on n'a pas, des fois on se pose la question, est-ce qu'on pense qu'on a les moyens de ne pas faire cet investissement-là? Personnellement, je ne pense pas. Et il faut s'imaginer qu'est-ce que les autres pays vont faire. Il faut regarder ce que les autres pays vont faire, puis pour rester dans la course. Et ça, c'est pas juste regarder notre monde à nous, là. Et je pense qu'on va venir à la conclusion qu'il faut faire des investissements importants.
I think that is hinting at exactly what the debate is going to be in the months and years ahead. And I think, again, taking the optimism that you've discovered in the sense of what opportunities lie in front of us, they could be quite profound. But Merrick, this question of funding for you, obviously every institution has got its own pressure points, but for you, do you think that it's a government answer, or is there something almost from Sophie's answer which looks at a closer relationship with the private economy to ensure that the dollars are beginning to flow in greater numbers?
I think we're going to need both. Just to build on Sophie's point, the rest of the world isn't standing still. We've benefited from chaos south of the border for the last 4 years. Not that I would wish our American friends ill, but a lot of talented people have chosen to come to Canada, whether they're students or graduate students or postdocs or faculty. because they prefer that kind of model that we have offered, the opportunity that's here, a government that's willing to invest in research, and also a government that has really made no secret of its interest in welcoming newcomers and openness. And I would say that that stance is nonpartisan, that we've seen that consistently from one stripe of government to another in Ottawa. So that's been a huge help to us. It's really helped us recruit fantastic talent to come to the country. Sophie's right, though, we're going to need help in retaining that talent when the rest of the world gets its act together. We know that with the president-elect south of the border making plans to move into the White House, there will be some significant shifts in immigration policy, in education policy, and research policy, all of which will have huge implications for us. And the same is true in the UK and in Europe, where, notwithstanding Brexit, I think that there's a recognition coming out of the pandemic that both government and industry is going to have to double down on research investment in order to ensure a brighter future and a more prosperous future. So there's definitely a role for the public sector and the private sector to play. In the case of the jurisdiction I happen to be in, we've seen public investment from the provincial government in higher education declining in real terms for about 20 years. And we have the lowest funding per capita of any jurisdiction in the country. That difference has been made up through tuition revenue. Although the increases every year for domestic students are regulated very tightly, nevertheless, we have seen a growing proportion of our revenues coming from tuition fees, and international tuition fees have made up the fastest growing component of that. So that's both good news and bad news. The good news is, the market power of institutions like the ones that are represented here today is sufficient to attract great demand from around the world. The bad news is, as recent events have demonstrated, it's a very risky model. You're building much more risk into your business model. It's one that's much more dependent on and subject to the kind of unpredictable nature of things like pandemics and other forms of global disruption. So, we're all, I think, living life in a riskier fast lane as a result of the changing business model that we are confronting. Let me just say one other thing, though, David, and that is that Mike touched a little bit on adult learning and on more kind of non-conventional forms of educational delivery, and Sophie mentioned this as well. I think this is the future, another big part of the future for our universities, that we're going to be playing a much bigger role in helping adult learners retool, reskill, upskill, that they'll be coming back to us, as they should, for assistance along the way. And it might be another degree, but it might not be. It might be a course or a certificate or a diploma or some other form of micro-credential. The Canada Training Benefit was a big move by the federal government a couple of budgets ago to fill a bit of the gap in this area, but I think we're going to need a lot more help there.
It's very interesting, the shift that the governments are going to have to consider, and I'm not sure just how advanced the thinking is yet. It's obviously a moving target, but we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to sort of tie this up with a bow. But Merrick, I'll ask you one last question, and then we'll go to Mike and to Sophie for the final word. But just on that point, Merrick, the idea that the universities may indeed start getting either a first-time student who is of a mature age or someone who is returning to reskill almost suggests that this is something that is the biggest opportunity the university sector has coming out of what has really economically going to be resulted as a greater depression than anything we've ever seen. Do you think that the will of the people who I agree will want that can be met by the commitment of a university that can't possibly to this day have been structured to satisfy that?
I think the answer is yes. It's going to take a lot of work. But one of the things that we've been talking about a lot around my place has been how we move something like a School of Continuing Studies from the periphery of the university to the core. You know, how we deploy their unique expertise in reaching adult learners, their unique expertise in innovating on the fly, developing new courses that actually don't, in most cases, have to pass muster with, you know, quality assurance bodies and provincial regulators and so on, but that are very market sensitive. You know, bringing those to the market very quickly in the space of weeks or months in response to demand. How they work with professional associations to help members upgrade their skill set and renew their professional development. These kinds of unique capabilities, we want to infuse that across the entire university. So we want them working with the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering, or the Faculty of Arts and Science, or the Faculty of Medicine, to help them translate all of their tremendous kind of curricular expertise into forms that are more accessible for a wider audience. So I'm not for a second underestimating the difficulty of that process, but I agree with you that it's absolutely fundamental to our future success.
Interesting. Okay, Mike, you've got a minute. What's your closing comment? Anything in particular, or where do we go from here?
Well, I guess my closing comment is that, as I said at the outset, COVID has had a differential impact on individuals across the country. And so as we look towards coming out of COVID, an inclusive recovery is going to be absolutely critical. And so how universities across the country respond to an inclusive recovery, I think, is going to be vital. Some of the things that Merrick's just talked about are some of the solutions. So we know, for example, that different communities will benefit from less traditional forms of the provision of programming, so that they can either do it from home, they can do it from more remote locations, etc. So I think part of our response as universities is to support the Canadian response, which is the need for an inclusive recovery.
Thanks, Mike. And Sophie, final word, please.
Oui. Moi, dans tout ce qu'on a dit, il y a une trame importante, et puis on n'en a pas parlé largement, mais c'est celle du développement durable. C'est-à-dire que cette perspective que cette économie, cette nouvelle université, cette collaboration, elle doit être réfléchie de façon à répondre aux impératifs de la lutte au climat et d'un développement qui est durable et qui reçoit l'acceptabilité sociale. Donc, c'est des défis significatifs. Puis, ça nous met au défi de bien encadrer, gouverner nos collaborations. Mais la génération actuelle le veut, le porte, l'incarne très fortement. Et ça va aussi changer nos universités dans la façon dont on imagine notre futur et la société en général. Alors, des beaux défis pour les universités canadiennes, puis des défis qui sont à notre portée, qui demandent de la patience, qui demandent des échanges, des conversations, mais qui apportent de l'espoir. Puis si on veut construire l'avenir, il faut y croire, il faut avoir confiance. Alors, voilà.
I love it. I love the optimism. An optimistic panel. I'm going to bottle this. I'd like to thank the three of you, our distinguished panelists, for an excellent discursive conversation about the challenges ahead, and for your honesty and the admission that there's lots still to do. On behalf of the Royal Society, the Globe and Mail, and Universities Canada, thank you all very much. I wish the RSC a wonderful rest of the week. And to you all, take good care, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Cheers.
Merci tout le monde. Au revoir.
Au revoir.